Although, of course, the purpose of an alt and the purpose of the title are a little bit different, but that's only assuming that everything works exactly properly and the user expects it. Links and calls to action. This is something I'm sure is very close to many of your hearts. So this is one of my favorite examples when we're looking at these types of things. Like MailChimp does a pretty good job about their pages. In terms of calls to action, they're pretty clear. What do they want you to do? They want you to sign up, they want you to see pricing, and they want you to explore features. They pretty clearly identify very quickly on this page the 3 things that they want you to do. You just landed here, and you are like kind of unsure about what's happening and what this MailChimp thing is. So from an SEO perspective, again, going back to like, why is your user here? What do they want to do? And what do you want them to do? Make sure you have very strong, easily identifiable calls to action across all the pages on your site. Again, coming back to like, it's pretty common to be like a homepage has like these great calls to action, and you get into one of your article pages, and you read the article, and you get down to the bottom, and you're like, well, what do you want me to do now? And you're like, okay, I guess I'm done on this website, and you leave. So thinking about in terms of having very strong calls to action in terms of both the things that you expect your users want to do and the things that you want them to do. Because obviously MailChimp wants you to sign up. They made that real obvious. But they'll give you the pricing and they'll give you the features if that's the next thing you want to do first. So otherwise, just generally links. Thinking in terms about within your actual article content, what kind of contextual linking do you need? It's common to do things like think about writing paragraphs so that you have a good call to, or not a call to action, but a good link at the end, so that when somebody finishes a complete thought, you give them the option to move on to a different page that is relevant to what they're looking at, particularly if you've got content broken up into very obvious sections. And then just generally, when you read the content at different points, just think in terms of, did I just tell the user something that's going to make them want to find something on my site? If so, give them that link. To some extent, similarly then, Google looks at that kind of interlinking, particularly on large sites, and it's a great way to make sure that the kind of authority spread out through your site is consistently reinforced and passed around the site, so you don't end up with these silos where people can't really get between them, and neither can the search engine. So the search engine has to really treat like, okay, this is all topic A, this is all topic B, and this is all topic C, and there is no overlap unless you're on the homepage. So moving on, measuring SEO and engagement. So one of the big things is that, maybe in some cases you've got one project, you're done, you're finished, but when working long term with a website, there's always more work to be done. You need to, once you've got that website up, well, how are people using it? Is it doing the right job? So we were talking about a little bit of this earlier, but you really have 2 usual obvious tools in your portfolio, Google Analytics and Google Search Console. Google Analytics will answer questions like, where are people landing from search? You can go in there, filter for your organic search traffic, take a look at the top landing pages. They will tell you what they do next. There's a navigation report in Google Analytics that will say, okay, people who came to this page, they 70% of them went to page B, 10% went to page C, and the rest of them exited the site never to be seen again. Do they convert? Obviously, setting up proper conversion tracking, whether it be soft conversions, like if you have an article website, basically you can have a soft conversion of viewed at least 10 pages, because that's a lot of ad views. Versus if you are e-commerce, did they buy a product? I mean, it's the holy grail of being able to do this kind of optimization. You literally know how much money you made by this person coming to the site. And then there's all sorts of cool advanced tracking you do. While Google Analytics is super easy to deploy, copy the code, paste it on the website, deploy it, and you're done. You have Google Analytics more or less tracking now. There's stuff like event tracking where you can do things like, did somebody actually play a video? How much of that video did they play? Did somebody start filling out a form and stop halfway through? That's a big user experience thing. Where I've had sites where I was doing a squeeze page where we're pushing a lot of advertising into it. We had a 5-field form. We did this tracking on it where you tracked every single form field, the interactions with it, looked at all the people who started filling it out, did not complete the purchase, and found out that a large number of people didn't like that the phone number was required. And at the end of the day, we didn't need that information. The email was enough to get back in touch with that client. And remove that from the thing, immediate 3% uptake in the total conversions coming through that funnel. So yeah, thinking about the types of things that you want to track, and if you're technical, doing it yourself. If you're not really on the technical side, talking to somebody else and just knowing that these things are possible. Be like, well, how can we go about tracking the interactions with this kind of thing? So Google Search Console it will answer questions like what keywords are sending people. It's the only place for this. Back in, how was it, 5 years ago now, 6 years ago now, Google stopped sending keyword data through on search queries. It used to be that you go in your Google Analytics, look at a keyword report, it would tell you all the things that people searched and how they got to your website and then what they did on the site. We no longer have that. Google can, basically on the one side, Google was like, oh, this is a security concern. On the other side, legions of marketers were like, Google, you're making us pay for ads to get the information that we want. Because AdWords, of course, tells you what people searched, but not Google Organic Search. So Google Search Console will give you some of this data. Not the full picture, but a pretty good one about what terms did you show up on, what was the click-through rate, what were the rankings when you showed up, stuff like that. And so that's a good place to jump in there and actually get an idea of how you're actually showing up on search. Are you improving or having problems with certain rankings? And start making decisions. Like a common one around click-through rate in terms of your titles and your meta descriptions. If you're getting like 20,000 impressions, you're showing up fourth for a very important term for your company, and your click-through rate's like 1%, there's clearly something wrong with your messaging, and you're probably not going to rank for much longer unless you change something. Because at the end of the day, if Google's ranking a website in 3rd or 4th position and it's not getting clicked, how long do you think Google's going to continue ranking that page? How am I indexed? Again, that was what I was mentioning earlier. You can answer questions around like, I made 4,000 pages on my website and Google only knows about 5 of them. Or worse yet, 1 of them. There's a great example we'll talk about later. Or on the other side, I have a 30-page website and Google has 5,000 pages indexed. And you're like, how is that happening? And that's where you find out things like, some Filipino hackers inserted a whole lot of pornography on my website and I didn't know for 2 months. This legitimately has happened.
It went through the roof.
So it makes so much traffic, but it's totally irrelevant. So yeah, Google will tell you about some of those things. And like a little bit more specific stuff, like there's a report in Google Search Console around what are the most common words and phrases on your website, which gives you an idea of like topically, how well have you written your website around the things that you want to rank for. It'll also, of course, flag potential problems more specifically. There's like a crawl errors report, tell you about broken links, or soft 404s is a common one. Soft 404s, obviously everybody knows 404s, error pages. Sometimes servers are not set up to actually respond with an error code, even when this page is an error. And so Google flags this as a soft 404 in the sense that Google's like, I think this is an error, but your actual server told me it was okay, and you should probably check out what's going on. This can be, like Microsoft servers have a common problem where every error page is a soft 404, and Google's kind of used to that. But you can also run into situations where you have legitimate pages where they're simply saying not enough content, or the content's too similar to another page, and Google will look at it and be like, well, I don't know what's going on here. Is this an error or no? And you're like, no, that's a legitimate page. Like, why do you think it's an error, Google? And it's a place to jump off to go in there to make adjustments and see what happens to that error as you try and fix it. You're going to have to expect it will take a little bit of time. You can also explicitly tell Google to come back to pages when you want it to through Google Search Console. To be like, hey Google, I updated this page right now. It should be fixed. Fetch and render. You can actually see in Search Console how Google renders that page. And then say, like, put it in your index. Like, this page is ready, please. All right, so understanding bounce rate. So bounce rate is a very commonly misunderstood statistic. First and foremost, in terms of the default way that bounces are counted in Google Analytics, they're not all bad. One of the most common problems I've had with dealing with clients with like informational websites, where like they're representing a product, and they don't sell anything on the website. It's just information about the product. Like CPG, like consumer packaged good brands. So they will have pages about product X, Y, and Z. People will like very much enter not by searching the brand name, but by searching a specific product that they need information about. That user will, under a default count of a bounce with one session, or only a session with only one page view, will enter the page exactly that they wanted. They will spend maybe 20 minutes on that page reading all of the information about the product that they need to know about, and then they'll leave. They are happy, the website did the correct thing for that user, they are a bounce. Because they only viewed one page. Google Analytics only knows about that first view, not about how long they spent on that page, and the fact that they left. And so you'll have the client be like, why do I have a 70% bounce rate? Like, what can we do to improve this? It's like, well, we could try and annoy users by forcing them onto another page to like satisfy your need for this number to be lower. But you need to understand that like this is not a bad thing. This is the goal of your website, and most questions are answered in one page view if I, as an SEO, do my job right. So there are improvements to how you track bounce rate. So going back to that concept of events, event tracking can be used to suppress a bounce. That essentially Google looks at whether more than one thing happened, whether that be a page view or an event track. And if more than one thing happens, that is not a bounce anymore. So the common ways of approaching this is doing something like, say, setting a JavaScript so that after 30 seconds an event fires. That way you know that any bounce in your bounce rate is somebody who spent less than 30 seconds on that page rather than an indeterminate amount of time on that page. It's great for article sites and stuff like, again, CPG goods, where you know that you have a lot of single page views, but some of those page views will be long enough that person was happy with what they got. Similarly, you can track an event based on scrolling through content and interacting with a page, like video views or like clicking through a slider, a whole bunch of different things that might be like legitimate interactions with your page. You can do a combination of these. Like, it's a really tricky way about going about it, because like you're like, maybe I want to track scroll through content. Well, what about somebody comes to my page, scrolls right to the bottom like that? It's like, nope, wrong, back. That person is now not a bounce and essentially was a bounce. Similarly, 30 seconds on page, somebody clicked to open a tab, opened 5 tabs in results, left it there, walked away from the computer. That person essentially comes back later, closes all the tabs, and then they never even looks at it. That person's also a bounce. So like, what if you do both? What if you say, after 30 seconds, check if they scrolled. After they scroll, check if it's been at least 30 seconds. And essentially the combination of these two things, you'll get a much better idea of like somebody actually spent some time on that page. So finally for this section, a little bit about some advanced tracking and user testing stuff you can do. If you've got lots of time and money, which many of us don't, but if you do, you've got stuff like Google Analytics has a professional version that has a whole suite of really cool options in it. I believe it'll run you about $150,000 a year, but it's very cool. They're apparently the 360 suite is bringing that price down, but it's pretty nuts. Optimizely, very, very cool tool for doing like split testing, multivariate testing, website personalization. Very powerful WYSIWYG editor. Like lets you, as like if you're just like a designer, not super technical, you can get in there. You can create tests. Be like, let's swap this image out. Let's change this button color. Let's try a different headline, and let's test it on like the next 2,000 users that come to our website. I can specify like that. If people click this button, they've now like completed the test for positively, or if they check out or whatever, the site's tagged. You can go in there and you can just test out on like a set of users, version A versus version B, or version A, B, C, D, E, F, G if you're doing multivariate. And it will tell you very definitively which one did a better job of getting to the result you wanted. Crazy Egg and ClickTail are both kind of interesting specific ones. Like Crazy Egg does like some pretty advanced like heat mapping, click mapping, giving you like a lot of really in-depth information about what parts of your page people are engaging with more than what Google Analytics can do. Usertesting.com. User testing is a pretty neat tool. I've recently come back to talk to them about their services, having not used them in like 6 years. It used to be like $25 a pop, and now it's about 100. But you create a test, you define the people that you want to see it, the kind of demographic, kind of area of like the country or whatever that you want these people to come to your site. You can then say like, okay, here's my URL. I want you to find out about this product. I want you to create an order. Here's a dummy credit card that will put it through without like actually creating a real order. And then I want you to come back and like use the software product once you've got the confirmation email. They will find the people who fit into the right demographic that work with them. Those people will sit down at their computer and spend like 20 or 30 minutes, headset on. They will talk you through their thinking as they go through what your test is. You can run quickly 10 of these, and like in 10 of those, you will find some of the most incredible problems with your website that you never expected. Like with one website I worked with at one point in time, where it was a subscription service for a publisher. So they had a publication that they sent out, but because everybody was going online, they had an online version as well. So we set up this test to do this. Told the person again to come to the website, buy out of the product, wait for the email to come in, confirm the account, go to the site, go look at the product. None of them could find the product after they had paid for it. Not a single one. One woman was almost in tears. She's like, "I'm really sorry. I really want to do this for you. I can't figure it out. And I feel wrong, like, what's wrong with this? And I sent her this like email back, like, I'm so sorry, this is why we did the test. It turns out nobody could find it. And it turned out, like, the choice that we had made that we thought was really obvious was that the link to the buy the product, before you bought it, was to buy it. Then after you had purchased it and logged in, that link became the link to go to the product. And like, it seemed pretty obvious, the text changed, but then visually for somebody who's just skimming through the page, they're like, oh no, that's the link to buy the product, I need to actually view the product. And like, this was like a revolution in our site design. It was like, suddenly like, wow, people who buy the product aren't getting pissed off and canceling it like 10 days later because they're like, I don't know what I bought, like, where is this thing? Anyway, there are alternatives to Google Analytics if you just want to try something new. Or you have a tinfoil hat about Google knowing what you do. Piwik is a good third-party option for doing analytics. And then Clicktail, kind of like Crazy Egg, like a nice, interesting one for specific kinds of testing. Clicktail uses JavaScript to actually record people on your website. So you can say, like, I want like 20 recordings or something. You deploy it on a series of pages, and then you come back to Clicktail later, and it will literally have like a video it plays where you can watch the mouse move around and scroll up and down the page and like do things on your website. It's a little bit creepy. Like, you know, don't do this on something where somebody's filling out their information that's personal information, but like, if you've got a site that that's not a problem for, it's actually really cool. And you can learn some, you know, it's like user testing, but without actually knowing what the person's actually thinking. And a heck of a lot cheaper. All right, so before we move into common mistakes that destroy SEO, any quick questions?
I don't have a quick question, but I do have, I just want to let everybody know, I just sent out an email to everybody that's on Ladies at UX a couple of days ago, and it actually includes one free user test.
Oh, really?
One free.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Then they get.
So look through the grab bag.
It's a really cool service. I really love it. It's,
and everybody can try it out if they want.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And I will test sites for free.
I know, it's one of the sites, like, when originally it came out, it's like, this is really cool. I want to test sites.
Yeah,
and then I found out that I can't because I'm in the industry. They're like, no, you know too much about this. You're not allowed to do that. There actually used to be a thing that was like an industry like user testing thing where it was like you go on the site and it gives you, it's called like testing roundtable or something like that. And you go on the site, you sign up, and you like browse through tests that people wanted to do. You'd say, yes, I want to do it, and you do the test. You'd earn some credits, and then you could put your own up there. And essentially, it was like a big exchange program for feedback.
Cool.
And I have no idea if it still exists. It just suddenly popped in my head.
Nice.
And it was free, because it was all like, you do mine, I do yours. All right, so common mistakes that destroy SEO. How am I doing for time? Am I going way over? Well, we'll see. JavaScript. You have to be very, very careful with JavaScript. So one of the things that some people who are pretty old school don't know, but most people do now, Google does render JavaScript. So you can make pages that rely on JavaScript to show certain content, and Google will generally find it. It's just not perfect. It doesn't always succeed in rendering your JavaScript. If you think in terms of the technical lift for implementing all this Google, it's crazy. It's just like so much processing power like beyond what they used to do to come to every page, not just look at the raw text sent to it, but be like, I'm going to actually try and render this page and index the render and understand it. It's a phenomenal engineering problem. It's very fascinating. Anyway, so Google does not interact with any page, any elements on your page the way a user does. It's pretty much not going to happen. So like if you have a script that like has like a bunch of text hidden inside it, or worse yet, is on the server and has not been fetched yet with Ajax, Google's not going to click that thing and fetch the text and render it. It's just not going to happen. Google just looks at the page, is like, okay, rendered, what links are on it, and instead of clicking on those links, it will like look at the URL, and if the URL is properly formed, it will go to that URL. It won't click on it. So yeah, on the Ajax side, if you're loading stuff at load with Ajax, you're probably okay, but I would test very, 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 very carefully. Again, come down here. So Google's console's, Search Console's fetch and render tool is your friend in this. You got a page up, you're like, I don't know if Google's seeing it right. You just use the fetch and render tool and see whether you see the content there. And when in doubt, just deliver text without using JavaScript. You know, if you're on a site that like you're building a site that really has to rank, you don't want to lose the rankings, probably shy away from doing a whole bunch of fancy scripting that hides content away in certain ways that then gets loaded. Next, dangers of JavaScript frameworks. So more specifically, we're talking, obviously Angular, the big one. There are lots of other ones out there. So Google can handle some frameworks, but you again really need to test very carefully. Know that when you're going into this, there might be problems. One of the common things that you'll see, you'll search Google for something, and you'll look at that link up at the top, and the link will be curly brace, page title, curly brace. And that is quite indicative of Google simply not rendering your Angular site. It sees all the references to content, but not the content. Obviously, this does very bad things to your rankings. So, say that you've got a website that you're working on, and you have to work with this. It's set up like this already. There's already problems with it. There are tools. So, prerender.io is one of the examples. Essentially, these tools will do the rendering of your website, save a cached version of the completed page once the script's all run, and when Google comes to index the site, it will jump in and be like, hey, I've got the version done for you. Here you go, Google. This is the actual completed version of that page. So that's a nice little option if you are in this situation already. Otherwise, though, if you're going into this, you really need to know what you're doing with Angular and make sure that it does work once you go live. So template to content ratio, which Mel talked about briefly. So we've got a nice little Panda over here. Many of you have probably heard of the Panda update. It has a lot to do with the quality of content on websites. So Google had a real problem some years back where you'd search for things and you'd get tons of junky web pages that had tons of advertising on them, huge navigations and side menus, this little teeny thing down the middle with like 3 paragraphs of content. Essentially, it was problems with Google's ability to understand the quality of pages in terms of how much crap is on that page versus how much of stuff that actually people care about. So they went to great lengths. Panda is actually named after the guy who was the engineer working on it, as opposed to literally pandas. But that the name really stuck. So your template to content ratio is a pretty critical thing. If your client's or the site you're working on, like, okay, we want a mega menu, and we want a really big sidebar that has like double sidebar, it has a Twitter in there and a whole bunch of other stuff, and we want a footer with all the links on the site, the whole thing. And that's going to be a problem because Google's going to look at that and be like, look at the code and be like, okay, first 60, 40% of the code, all template. Middle 10%, content. And then the bottom rest of it, all template. That's a pretty strong indicator to Google that your site is not very good. Think about it in terms of, if you come to the page, the main thing you should be showing people is what the page is about. Don't overload them with a whole bunch of other stuff. Otherwise, Google is likely to not rank your website well if there's a lot of pages like that. Like if you go out and you're most of your website is just pages with very little content on it or thin content, it may be an indicator that your whole website's junk. If you do some pages like this, Google might ignore those pages. Or they might rank, but just not very well. It's really important to have a good core of unique content per page. Again, paying attention to the actual industry that you're working in. It's not that unusual that an e-commerce site has a whole ton of pages with a short little piece of text for every single product. That's fine. But beyond that, if you look at a page and you're like, this page literally has 3 sentences on it, but I have this huge navigation and everything. You can get away with a few of those. Won't work for SEO, but it's fine if those pages exist. If you do a whole lot of them, it'll be a strong indicator that your site is probably not worth ranking.
I can speak into this one a little bit more because this one, when you're designing a website and you're planning things, we had one particular client in the window indoor space, and the same features, they sell the same glass on all the windows, they sell the same Krypton for all the windows, it's the same sashes for all the windows. They have all these features for all the windows, and we didn't want to rewrite every feature for every window, right? So, we went through this process of trying to find a balance between how do we design this gorgeous page that shows all the glass and basically, like Mike said, we don't want the user to click into any other page. This is the page where we want them to get all the information, see the glass options, see the installation options, see all that stuff, but that's all template content. That's spread across 30 different pages. So there was a balance between, okay, we want all that information in there, but we need not 500 characters, we now have to redesign this thing so that there's way more content there that's much more unique versus sometimes I see this a lot where there's tons of template content and 2 lines. And all that's pulled through the red, and Google does not like that. I think that's a really big thing for UI UX design, is if you're taking all these blogs that are elsewhere on the website and you're pulling in that Twitter feed and you're doing this and you have just a teeny little bit of content, it's a major signal that that page isn't likely to rank well. The other thing you could do is, and we had to do this, is we had to rewrite some of our features. It's super annoying, like super annoying to do this. We're not doing it for the user, we're doing it for a robot.
Yeah.
But we had to do it. So we rewrote the way Krypton gas sounded across like a few pages. We had to do that to satisfy the user, giving the user everything they needed with every opportunity to convert, but being very cautious of this template to content ratio. I think that this is a big issue in UI UX design. So something to be very aware of when you're designing sites.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I worked with a antiques company at one point in time, and I still hate the idea of red lacquer console tables. You have a lot of those. I had to write unique descriptions for every single one. So I don't have anything else to say about red lacquer console tables. So yeah, avoid large navigation, avoid large sidebars, large footers, lots of ads. Like a big one is ads. Like Google can detect ads on a site, and if you have like ads everywhere, you will not rank, because that's a particularly worse than template, just like regular template. And repeated content elements. Like we had back about, like it's not necessarily stuff that you think of as template, but stuff that you repeat from page to page or frequently. Don't hide what you want found. So some of you might recognize this cutoff screenshot site. So basically, if you can't put a URL into the bar and get to the content, and the content displays on the page at load, Google probably doesn't want to rank it. This includes anything after the hash. So like in this case, in this website, you have a course here, you have overview, admission requirements, courses, careers, more info. This is like an edge case where it's not really necessarily serious, but is an example of what's happening. That like each of these different tabs is referenced by having like an on-page anchor, a hash URL, that instead of taking you to a place on the page, makes that content visible, that tab selected for that user. So like for users, it works fine. You can drop that URL and you get to it. From Google's perspective, it thinks this is all the same page and only looks at the original version. The exception to this is hash bangs. A hash bang is recognized as a different URL. This is getting into technical if you know stuff around like building dynamic websites and stuff. That means something. So anyway, the idea is basically don't put important content into accordions. Don't put it in tabs. Don't put it into pop-ups, don't put it in overlays. Essentially, if that content is important for your page ranking, is what your page is about, it needs to be displayed when that page is loaded before interacting with anything. There are ways to get around having like a non-loading page, like going back to like Angular in general, that you can load pages, load sections of what is essentially one page by having references with URLs. We'll talk a little bit about this shortly. But generally, you want to avoid these things. It doesn't mean you can't do accordions or tabs or anything like that. Like a great example is like on an e-commerce site and you have a tab for reviews. That review content is not your primary content. It's not a big deal if it's hidden. A lot of sites will load that review content via Ajax anyway because it's a pretty heavy server load to load that for every user when most users don't even care about looking at it. In this case, this actually doubles it up, where I believe under courses, the courses tab obviously is not visible at upload. You can't see the content in it, and when you go into courses, every single course information is inside a accordion.
Something to note too, when TBK is building websites, we love to check out some of the top, what I think are some of the best experiences online. Apple's a great online experience, right? They really liked tabbed content. So you'd be on their MacBook Pro page, and they would have two tabs, and some would talk about tech specs, and some would talk about something else. If you look at their new pages, they're dropping tabs. They're not really even using tabbed content anymore because I'm sure they looked at the data and the numbers and saw that people weren't really flipping. Yeah. Like they would miss it. So I think that's, as a designer, you're trying to take copywriting and display it in the most effective way possible. But we're really shying away from accordions and tabs, generally speaking, overall, for key content.
Exactly. I mean, and this whole thing, going back to like Ajax and stuff, if you don't want Google to index all your reviews and don't want Google to index a bunch of secondary content that's like maybe repeated from page to page, you can load it that way and you'll know that Google probably isn't going to be indexing this because it requires those interactions to be able to show it. So it works both ways. Sometimes you want this. All right, moving on. So long scroll SEO. Talk about single pages. To put it simply, push data is your friend. Essentially, that under some of the newer technologies that are available, like you can do things like you can control, and up here we actually have a hashbang URL. What URL you see up here in the bar and how your history changes while interacting with a single page. Again, common under like certain frameworks and certain common like content management systems that are quite new. It creates a great user experience. There's no page loads. Everything's really snappy. You can preload content, user clicks, immediate, no loading. The Life of Pi, the making of Life of Pi website is a kind of good example of this. So as you scroll through the page, long scroll page, great animations as we're going through it, and you'll notice that your history is modified as you go from section to section. So if you drop in this Richard Parker URL, it loads the site and then flips you to the correct section. Interestingly enough, they didn't take the final step to tell Google about how the page was structured, and Google doesn't actually know. But if you properly communicate to Google which URL versions, fragments, represent which sections of your page, like in a long scroll page, Google can actually index those as basically, from Google's perspective, different pages of a long scroll page. This is pretty common, say, with like, you've got a Pinterest style thing where it just keeps scrolling. You can paginate that like this, and so that Google will actually see like first loaded section, page 1, second loaded section, page 2, third loaded section, page 3. I mean, if you're on the technical side, it's great to learn how to do this. But the important thing is to know it is possible. That you can essentially treat what is, from the user's perspective, one gigantic page as a whole bunch of different pages from a search engine perspective, and the search engine will then serve those as different pages.
So basically you can do long scrolling pages, but very carefully and with technical know-how.
Yeah, pretty much.
Said simply.
And by and large, most sites you'll see don't do it.
Yeah.
It's pretty unusual.
Because everybody loves, like, we get calls all the time, can I get a one-page website? And that typically is a
Yeah,
bad
it's like,
choice
yeah,
for
you
SEO.
could do that if you don't want search traffic.
If you, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
You know,
sure.
Exactly. It's like your website's going to be promoted by handing out business cards. Fantastic. I don't know why you want a business card or a website. You could just hand out pamphlets. But, at the same time, you can do that. And there certainly are, to some extent, like, movie websites can get away with it. Because, like, a movie website, like, people are going to Google the name of the movie and go to the movie website, and the movie website will rank for that. And there really isn't going to be, like, a lot of granular content that they really care about ranking. IMDb is probably going to be for stuff about the the director or the actors or whatever. There are cases where you really don't care about SEO, but those are unusual. So staging and going live, we're just about wrapped up here. One of the most important things is when you're building a website in a staging environment, don't let Google see it. It's really awkward when the client's like, the website looks really good. Why is the URL so weird? And you're like, oh, that's our URL. Whoops. So very simply, the robots.txt file, it sits in your root directory. Example.com/robots.txt has to be there. Only place it works has to be exactly called that. You put in user agent : disallow : and that's just telling Google, don't index anything on this site. Beyond that, it's even better to actually put some kind of login against it or something like that, because even beyond Google finding it, you probably don't want other people somehow stumbling in there anyway, unless it's you or your client who are actually supposed to be looking at that site at that time. But when you do this, don't forget to undo it when you go live. I have legitimately had clients who are like, we launched this new website, it looks really good, and we have absolutely no traffic coming to our website. Like, what happened? It's like, well, you just told Google not to index it. Like, all you need to do is change literally one line of text, and suddenly you're back on the internet. So this is like happened to be like an unusual number of times that you end up that, like, yeah, it's just because like the developers put that robots.txt on the dev server, forgot about it, launched the site, and suddenly like the old site flips over to the new one, and you're not going anywhere. Similarly, like, double check other like SEO things like your XML sitemaps and your like canonical URLs. If you get to the more technical side of SEO, you'll know like these things are not super complicated or easy to check. It's not unusual where certain things maybe were like hard coded in such a way that the dev versions of those go live. And it's not critical, but like it'll be confusing signals to Google. So one last section, just this one last thing, and we're all wrapped up. Rebuilding sites properly. This is a very, very important thing. So you've got a site, you have tons of content on it, great rankings, it's really, really great. It doesn't look that good, it's kind of old, you're hired, you're going to redesign it, make it look awesome, get the whole thing live, get it up, suddenly no more traffic. What happened? We had kept all the content in place like it should be fine, it's not there. First and foremost, ensuring that you keep old content that's performing well in search relatively intact. You can rewrite pages, that's okay, but in terms of what Google will see is that if example.com, the original one, suddenly changes to a very different example.com homepage with totally different text on it, totally different imagery, totally different code, Google might look at that and just be like, that's really weird, that's not the page I was ranking at all. Maybe I shouldn't rank it for the same things anymore. So to some extent, having like at least a core of like, maybe you rewrite it, but you keep a lot of the same sort of like wording in there. Ideally, try and keep the text fairly similar, if not the same. Second, redirects. That very simple, like that simply if you are changing the URLs of things, put a redirect in, just a regular 301 redirect. Google will look at the redirect and follow it through and just transition that ranking nicely over. The exception to this is that it has to be relevant. If you had like a great page about blue widgets and you got rid of it and you made more of a general widgets page, it's about blue, red, green, yellow widgets and polka dot ones, all sorts of different widgets, and you're like, we'll just transition the blue widget page to that widget page. It should be okay, right? Google will look at that redirect and say, those are not the same pages at all. Like, I'm not going to rank the general widget page for red widgets. I'm going to look at that and basically say, that redirect, that's a 404 to me. That's not a redirect. There has to be a very similar pages going from point A to point B, from your old to your new. You can try pushing the boundaries on this. There's no exact rules about it, but it comes down to when you go into your search console, you look at like the last 6 months of organic traffic coming to your website in Google Analytics or like the last 90 days of Search Console. You look at your top landing pages. You probably want to go through those landing pages from the top down where you're like your top 10 or your top 20 or your top 20%, depends on the website you're working with, and make some choices around which of these are most important that we keep those search rankings, what are they associated with, how do we ensure that transition from old site to new site, when Google looks at it redirect, it sees what it says is like, yeah, that's more or less the same, you get to stay ranking. Finally, just generally, try and avoid overly drastic changes. It's one of the nightmares I've generally had about, like, you have a client come to you, they're like, we rank great, we built the site in 1996, we need to update it for 2016. And like, there's no good answer in that situation. Like, you can't transition like a tabled like 1996 website into like Angular and expect Google to like, oh yeah, this is all the same, because it's not. It's just never going to be the same. You're so far apart that it's very difficult to keep rankings. And like, I've had real problems in the past where you set the expectation, say like, I'm sorry, like, there's no way I can guarantee you that your SEO is just going to be the same from F1 before and after. And you're going to see shifts. You're going to see drops in rankings. You may see rises in rankings. I've had like the opposite happen where like sometimes you drop 60% and you make it back up in the next 6 months, and then your client's really happy after that point. Other times you see something really weird happen where like Google suddenly starts ranking you for all sorts of stuff, and you see this crazy like 80% jump in organic search traffic. And it's usually Google having a weird reaction to the fact that you updated your site, and then that just tails back off. And so they're really happy for like 2 weeks, and then suddenly the traffic normalizes again. They're like, well, what did you do? I don't know. It's what Google did. It wasn't me.
I think this is a really key point to mention is as designers, we love to go into ugly sites and make them beautiful and amazing and exciting and all these fantastic things. If you notice some of the largest sites in the world, they don't just launch a new site.
Yeah.
They have such good rankings, and they're making untold amounts of money monthly from those rankings that they would never do a big site redo like that. They just wouldn't do that because they would destroy. Amazon, you will not go to the Amazon homepage and see an entire new website ever. They won't do that. They will never do that. It would destroy their ranking. So there's setting expectations up with clients when they come to you and they want to look fancy and beautiful and amazing and all this great user experience. The truth is Google wants that too. Google doesn't want to show a website that looks like it was built in 1996. So yes, and Google wants a mobile and tablet responsive website and everything, but you have to set expectations that your SEO is going to shift in a major way. It takes time. You are not the same website. So what you had before will not be what you go forward with. There's really clear expectations to set there when you're going through this, because it's just, when you do an entire rehaul, you're going to look completely different from an SEO perspective once you're done.
Yeah.
And that's just something to keep in mind when going through any kind of website redesign.
Yeah, like there was one of the major brands I worked with before, and the SEO project was huge to do the major redesign. It was an older site. They were really revamping it, total change in platforms. I think it was ended up being like a $200,000 SEO project. There was that much work. And we went through it and told them, we're like, well, we're going to lose some traffic. So what's going to happen? And sure enough, we launched the site. We lost about 20% that first week. And then we kind of languished about 20% down for a couple months. A year later, we were up 25% year over year though. That over time, we gave time to develop, gave time to adjust some of our optimization that we had put into place, add some more content that we realized was kind of missing. And we easily beat where we were before. Otherwise, that site would have been chugging along, slowly losing traffic still. But there was time that it took to have that happen. So that wraps it up. Hopefully we're not too much longer than I thought we would be. And any final questions wrapping this up?
On the flip side, if the content is too old, they have an aging algorithm too.
Yeah, that's true. So if the site's really stagnant, there certainly is. Yeah, they look at well, what was the date last modified of this thing? Is it actually still relevant? How much that matters varies by vertical. In the sense that, if it's something where nobody's content changes very frequently, then yeah, that aging impact is not going to be huge. And that's one of the reasons that doing things like having a blog on your site is a great idea, because it means that at least the site as a whole has some stuff that's changing on a more regular basis. Google Search Console will tell you how often Google's coming back to your site and how many pages it's visiting, and you'll see that trail off to nothing if you're never updating your site.
And also, if you want to have something that's really fancy, a UX, person is going to want it to look really jazzy. And if you had then behind the scenes something that completely expands everything, like the renderer that you were talking about, it feels to me like by doing it that way, you get all of the content expanded, accessible, indexable, and then you would want also to encourage people to be linking to that as well. But at the same time, you have all this beautiful, funky stuff.
Yeah, exactly. There's so one of the common things we've done with accordions, where the accordions are really nice to have, say, in a really big frequently asked questions, was that we set it to render that it loads with all the accordions open, and then after a short period or via click, you compress all the accordions, so that way they're all available and the text all visible at load, and then shortly thereafter, you're like, okay, here you go, user, we can bring this all back down. There is a flip side to that kind of caching and giving Google a different version of the page. That there used to be, and it's not very common anymore, a black hat tactic was to build a web page that was only for Google, serve Google that version of the web page, and give users something totally different. And so if you go too far in how you cache your pages and serve them to Google versus what you actually show the user, at a certain point, Googlebot doesn't always identify as Googlebot. Sometimes Googlebot comes by and be like, oh, hey, I'm in Albuquerque, I'm on an iPhone, and it's it's not. It's wearing a little mask and coming through your site. And it's okay, index this version of the page. Let's compare it to what I have in my cache. Is it roughly the same? Does it make sense to me? And if you go too far that direction, Google will turn around and be like, you're trying to trick me. It's not right. But yeah, that's not as common anymore, partly on the side where they do a lot much more sophisticated